Back at it on the SuccessFlow podcast. What's up, my man?
Not much, dude. So I'm reading this book, The Gap in the Gain. Dan Sullivan, Benjamin Hardy. I heard about it a couple years ago from a mutual friend of ours, Ed Drummond. And I think that, like you said, the book, we were talking about this before the podcast. It came out a few years ago, so he must have been one of the first readers. And then you're like, dude, let's do an episode on The Gap in the Gain. I was like, dude, that's perfect timing because I'm halfway through it. So I'm excited to get into this one. That'll be the bamboo banger of this podcast, is kind of talking about the principles of what the gap and the gain are. But first, where are you? The background is very different than what you normally have.
I did a little underslept today, but that's okay. That happens in these lives we live. But it makes the topic even more perfect because I am sitting at my uncle's beautiful home in my home. Well, little ways in towards St. Louis from my hometown, but in the St. Louis area, and perfect for this topic, the gap in the game, where we're kind of measuring where we came from. But Ed Drummond, friend of the pod, he'll be on soon. This is a perfect tee up for him. To get him in gear on getting on the podcast. He's building a studio that we're hoping to go live from, or I think it's built. So that's going to be a fun episode. But yeah, I love this topic. When we talk about the gap and the gain, it really applies to this podcast, right? We're setting large goals and we are running and gunning and getting after trying to chase these goals, but we tend to forget how far we've come. I know I'm bad at this. You've been a great monitor and accountability partner saying, hey, chill out. Like, let's figure out, like, why don't you take a step back and look at some progress, which is really that portion in a nutshell. But I'm pumped that you're reading the book. I think that it applies to every area of life. There's not a segment. This isn't just business. This isn't just creation or creativity. It's every area of the world, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's why I love the book so much. Is it's not business heavy. It's not personal heavy. It's basically everything that we're about is defining success for ourselves, becoming the best versions of ourselves. And I just really resonate with books like that. And like I said, I'm only halfway in, but some of the principles already are just like, dang, like it's a lot of what we already talk about. And so it relates really well. But basically, for the listeners, the gap and the gain is two principles. The gap is like from now to your ideal state, right? So like wherever it is you want to go, your ultimate vision, the things that you're striving for. And that's the gap from now until you get there. And then the gain is where you came from to where you are now. So when you started this journey, maybe you were, in corporate sales and you wanted to move and start a new business, and you're now an entrepreneur, but you're not a $10 million company entrepreneur. You are a $1 million entrepreneur. And so the gain is I was not an entrepreneur and now I'm $1 million revenue entrepreneur. And the gap is I'm only a $1 million revenue entrepreneur. I'm not a $10 million revenue entrepreneur. So the idea of what the book says is like, being happy and realizing all the things that you've accomplished from where you were before you started that business to where you are now, as opposed to being sad that you haven't gotten to where your ideal state is. And so it's the perspective and looking at the positives in all things and all all situations. So I just think it's a really cool concept because it's hard, right? Especially as you're growing all the time and you're like next level. Like there's always growth. And yeah, while all that's great and that's what you strive for is, you want a continual growth to learn and expand your skill set and all this stuff. But you do have to take those moments of rest and reflection and refresh and recharge and be like, man, I have done a lot. Like, this is really incredible. I am happy because I'm on the right path. I'm happy when I get to that goal. And so I think it's a really interesting concept. I like the way they put this book together. If you're an Audible person, it's cool because they read a chapter and then Ben Hardy and Dan Sullivan chat about the chapter, like a podcast style almost.
Yeah, it's how Goggins did his books. Goggins did the same thing, and you get into their minds more. You get into their minds and they're able to elaborate on those stories and take you back to the emotions in the moment, which they do a good job in the book. But I'm loving that new genre of book that's almost going podcast interview, because we're an ADD society. We talk about it all the time on this podcast, whether we like it or not. And it keeps that novelty for your brain that keeps you locked in, that novelty of switching around while still adding value and building off the concepts, I think super effective for the leader. And I think what you just summarized up there was the way you measure your progress is backwards against where you started, not against your ideal. And we're constantly measuring against that ideal, which is miserable, right? Because you're not there. And as much as we talk about visualization and keeping our eye on the prize, that's great. But what you're good at, again, and when we were talking about this podcast, you were bringing it up, is that can get overwhelming. That gain can get overwhelming. But if you start looking at the obstacles that you've already hurdled, your trees on your walk up at Woods Canyon, oh, I got over that tree. I can get over more trees on the way to that next peak, that next target point.
Yeah. I mean, you set massive ultimate visions, massive goals. You have to do that. Like you have to set big stuff, but you got to create the strong targets along the way, achievable targets along the way. You know, it's like the marathon example. You set a goal of, I'm going to run a marathon next year. A lot of people just be like, that's just not going to happen. So I'm not even going to try, because that's too big of a goal. I know it's not possible. And so you have to set, okay, well, every quarter, what can I do to get to that marathon peak performance where I can at least finish the marathon? That's the goal, right? So this quarter, I'm just going to focus on getting a 5K under my belt, 3 miles, right? And then next quarter, I'm going to focus on a 10K. So now 6 miles. Then the next quarter, I'm going to focus on a half marathon, right? And you just continue to progress. And then you get to that marathon and you're ready to rock and roll. And you're like, but along the way, you're not upset that you're not running the marathon 3 months down the road. You're happy because you're like, dang, I just ran a 5K and I haven't ran anything in 6 years or 10 years or whatever, right? And so that's the progress and the kind of the mindset you got to have with those big goals.
Absolutely. And I loved how he put, being in the gain is not about denying your ambitions. We're driving that home. That's not what this is about. You can't rest on your laurels, but it's about grounding them in reality and appreciating the journey. This point of time, right where I'm at on this timeline of this hero's journey that you're on, being in that moment and the understanding of your own achievements and your own growth. I think it's just super well put, and it changes your perspective on back to the here and now. And also, he gets into some of the tactics and transitions into another book that we're going to talk about here in a second. 10X is better than 2X. Because when we were talking about this, I was actually merging the books in my head. I'm like, oh, these are two separate books, because they obviously build off of it. But I just think that this is a really great way to have a fulfilling approach to life, and everyone's looking for happiness. I go back and forth on happiness. We just had Jacob Marshall on, who that really wound up being the title of the podcast, but the fulfillment, right?
Yeah.
What are we doing all this work for if we can't take a step back and enjoy where we came from, which I'm doing right now, looking out at the golf course here in St. Louis, Missouri, and just thinking about how life was 18 years ago before I headed out west. It's interesting how perfectly this times out.
I remember the last time I was in St. Louis, we went to the Vikings-Rams game, and dude, I was never happier after the Vikings ran all over Adrian Peterson all day, went for his 2,000-yard season and almost broke the single-season record, Eric Dickerson's record. That game, he went off for like 200-some-odd yards. 236
yards. I remember that specifically.
I was so excited. I was so happy.
I had to live through in a 3-year stretch going to that game with you, as well as DeMarco Murray running on the Rams for 256. Who the heck was on the D line and playing linebacker at that time? Oh my gosh. I remember that trip. We're going to spare the listeners some of the details from that trip, because that was back in our party days. God. That's for sure.
That was right after Jack was born, dude. That was like, I was like
that was your first getaway.
That was my first getaway as a new dad he was 4 months old, and I was not I was not cooking with the same sauce back then.
We thought we were invincible back then. That's for sure. Yeah. I'll be seeing Eric today, so I'll have to bring up some of those stories. But jumping back to Dan Sullivan and Dr. Benjamin Hardy are who wrote these two books. And you and I were having a healthy debate on the book that followed The Gap in the Gain called 10X is Easier Than 2X, which doesn't sound logical. It also kind of blew my mind in the regard of, as you're approaching a specific goal or craft area of your life, and I think this applies to sales, it applies to everything, as I mentioned before. But you kind of thought this was Grant Cardone with the whole 10X. He's branded everything 10X. 10X
I didn't realize he was that.
Who we've talked about. But the concept of 10X being easier than 2X is if you're only aiming for a 2X improvement, you're simply trying to work harder using the same methods. If you have to aim for 10X, 10X requires complete reinvention. You have to look at the problem from a different lens to have that type of leverage. So it really shakes down your whole strategy on how you're approaching that problem. Doubling your workload, hard work's going to get you a certain amount. But that's when we're talking about scaling a business. A lot of examples are talking about what got you to 10 to 100,000 a month isn't going to get you to $1 million a month, whatever it might be. But it works in every level of life. The way that what we're approaching at Workiva on selling the entire platform suite of solutions that we have is a totally different game than just going and selling specifically SEC reporting. It requires a different approach, meeting preparation. We have so many stakeholders on both sides of the table that have to be in perfect alignment. And we had to start thinking 10X as opposed to just work harder and sell all these solutions. So you pushed back on me a little bit, which I love. That's why we're here, because 10X can get overwhelming, right?
Right.
Those goals can weigh on us. And for me, early in my career, that would put me in a state of paralysis, research and, analysis paralysis, overthinking the problem and saying, well, 10X is, because I have to reinvent myself, I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to go back to what I know. And I think you had some good thoughts on kind of challenging that mindset.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's whenever you think of 10X, you think of like massive, kind of like the marathon example. It's very difficult for people to see what their ideal state would be at a 10X level versus a 2X level, because they know they have to put in that work and they have to put in that change. And most people don't want to work. Most people want to do more with less, right? But you can't do more with less if you don't actually put in the work on yourself and find the things that align with what you're striving for. Like, it's impossible to continue working towards your dreams and goals and 10Xing and all this stuff without making the necessary changes and having the necessary mindset to putting in the work. Like, it's just, at the end of the day, it is what it is. And so that's where I push back, is like, if you're going to 10X yourself, it's easier to 2X because the mindset is, well, I don't have to do that much. I can just double down on what I'm already doing. But it's harder for most people to accomplish 10X or think 10X because they don't want to put in the work. And that's really where it's pushing back. And so you have to break it down into what are the incremental changes that I have to make and focus on in order to get to 10X. So one of the things they talk about in The Gap in the Gain is your success criteria. And it's a lot of what, when you're developing your ultimate vision, you got to think about your core values. And you got to think about the things that you don't want 10 years from now, right? Like, what are the things that I'm doing right now currently that I don't want to be doing 10 years from now? And how do I 10X my ultimate vision? And so I got to think about all those things. And then I got to make the changes to make sure that those don't wants aren't around 10 years from now. Now, you may have, let's say you're in a career or something, a career trajectory, and you're in the right industry, you're in the right career, and maybe it's sales and you're corporate sales and you want to get to that CEO level. Yeah, you're going to have to put in the work in that trajectory and like work your tail off to get to where it is you want to be. Maybe you don't want to be doing sales, but you have to do it to get to where you want to be, right? So you have to put in that work. But if it's a career that you don't love and your ultimate vision is something else, like maybe it's philanthropic stuff and you're doing work that you don't really love, like you got to make those choices and you got to make those hard decisions. Like, can I upend what I've worked towards now that are going to put me for, may have to take a step back to put in the work to get to where I want to be. So this success criteria, I think, was a really neat concept. And it's asking these questions. Like, you can have a couple of questions or you can have a full list of 10, but you got to write down the things. Like, if I have an opportunity presented to me, the first one is, does it align with where I'm going and my ultimate vision? Does it align with my core values? If the answer is no, then I'm not saying yes to that opportunity. Like, it's immediate. That's the first question of the success criteria. And then if you say yes, it does align. It's like, okay, well, does it further my growth? Does it challenge myself on purpose? Does it allow to make an impact on others? Will it continue the education and skill set and what I'm striving for? And so when you start answering yes to all these questions, okay, yeah, it's a good opportunity. I'm going to go for it. And so you have those types of success criteria, as well as defining, what do I want? What do I do? What do I want in 10 years from now? Can I wake up every single day and choose what I want to do? Can I live anywhere in the world? Can I have passive income that supports my lifestyle? Right. And then those are 10X type ideologies and thoughts. Well, how do I get there? And you got to break that down.
Absolutely. And on that 10-year time frame, they also mentioned it. I've heard this from so many top performers that have actually been through the gamut. Most people vastly overestimate what they can do in 1 year, and they vastly underestimate what they can do in 10 years. And so we beat ourselves up over not hitting 1 year goals. So then we lay off the gas when, if you just continue that momentum, where you're going to be in even 5 to 7 years, not even to think of 10, if you keep that momentum, we give up before we can get to that ultimate vision. And so it's that obsessive, just day after day, compounding, pouring water on the bamboo shoot. All the common themes keep coming back on incremental growth and just continuing to get better every day. Kaizen, as our friend Tyler Smith would call it.
Yeah. And I think there's a concept too, talking about needs versus wants. And what do you need in your life versus what do you want in your life? And it's okay to just want something. You don't have to say, I need it. Like, I need to get there. Why? You don't need to get there. You want it. Right. And so, like, with your relationship with your spouse, you don't need your spouse. If you need your spouse, you're dependent of your spouse. You want your spouse. You're independent. That's more love, right? You want your spouse in your life because you love them, and that's what you want. You don't need them in your life. And so that dependency versus independency is super crucial, and focusing on what your wants are. And you can want them just to want them. You don't have to give people a reason why you want them. Just want them, and then develop harmony in your life of why you want them. Right? You have to have compelling reasons why. And so that obsession versus harmony is where kind of like, I'm obsessed because I need this, almost like an addiction. If you switch it to a more harmonious type of life where I want these things because it means so much to me, it's just because I want them. Like, I want these things in my life, and there's love to that. There's passion to that. There's power in that. And so I think the concept of needs versus wants was a good one.
Taking it back to the gap and the gain. I love how much they talk about comparison. We always talk about the thief of joy, the era of social media, watching everybody else's highlight reel. And that comparison is hurtful because it rarely does any good. Yeah, your peer group, if you want to call it comparison, we talk about that just being around talent, around people living the life that you want to live. That's good. That's a rising tide raises all ships. But if you're measuring yourself against others, you're in the gap. You're automatically thinking about where you're not. It lowers your energy, lowers the drive and ambition. But if you are measuring against yourself, you're in the gain no matter what. If you're cross-referencing the guy or woman that was looking at herself in the mirror yesterday, you're in the gain. You're micro, dropping down into the micro of measuring, oh, this is better than yesterday. This is better than last week or last month. I'm making progress. That is the engine that keeps pushing you forward up the hill.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's nothing worse than, you can see it on social media, all the positive, like influencer type stuff, life is good type stuff. And you're like, oh man, why am I not there? Why am I not there? And if you're asking yourself, why am I not a lot, you're in the gap.
That's the gap.
That's the gap. Why am I not there? Why am I not doing this? Why am I not doing that? It's like, well, what have you done? And realize the gain, and then add to that and compound on it, and just focus on where you were. And there's a reflection piece to that. I mean, every day I in my head, I write, I write in my head, right? Like I have a visual, like I literally write in my head, right? We all have these thoughts. And so I'm like, I reflect on the day and I rate the day. And I'm like, was this a 10? Like I was, it was an 8. Okay. Well, how was I yesterday? And it's not necessarily, was it a 10 based on the things that came out of my control? It's more of what I was able to control and how did I react to those things? And did I put in the work that I set forth for myself today? Did I accomplish what I wanted? But even if I didn't accomplish them, did I put forth effort to try and make it happen? And if it didn't hit my goal, I'm still happy with that because it was a good day, right? Because I'm working, I'm active, I'm moving, I'm shaking, I'm doing different things. And so you rate the day and try to be better than you were yesterday. And so I think that little exercise helps you remain in the game because you're trying to be better yesterday or better today than you were yesterday. And then tomorrow you'll be better than today.
Again, back to the timing and synchronicity of this is just like each day this week, it was just one of those 9 out of 10 weeks on the jiu-jitsu mat, really strong movement on Workiva opportunities that I'm working. We're cranking on. We've got so much going with Gento with the summit approaching, moving the needle there. And I was beating myself up on the travel and working remote today and Monday. And it's like, I got yesterday on the plane flight, I texted you right when I landed because I haven't experienced anything like it in a long time. I logged in as soon as we were allowed to pull laptops up and Paula was watching a movie and I could not believe it. I just jumped I was in Google Docs most of the time and they said, please prepare for departure. And I was jarred. And I looked at Paul and she's like, yeah, you were locked in. She's like, is your neck hurt? Because I was doing the poor posture, like forward into the laptop thing, looking like a goon probably. And I'm like, I go, it's been 3 hours. Anyway, it was this whole perspective shift of we're talking about this stuff all the time. I'm getting into flow as frequently, but not like that. Not those 3 hours just, and you realize everything that got done. It's just so, you're doing the right things. And when you get glimpses like that, it's just so much more. It's that pat on the back, not that you need it's just evidence. It's evidence that the work is paying off. That's it.
Yeah, no, that's a good word there because you texted me and it's like, there's nothing better than working, like open up the laptop when you got a project on the plane. I love it because I don't know, you can't control the plane. And like, there's some fear there. Like if this thing goes down, I'm going down. Like there's nothing you can do about that. And you're like, shit, what are the things I can do to take my mind off this stuff? So open up it's either the booze or the laptop. And these days it's more the laptop. The old days, it used to be the booze. And so now it's getting like, I had a trip to Fort Collins and, my storybook write up, the email for that week, I hadn't started it. And I had this idea of the triple threat position and the different things you can do when an obstacle is in your way. You have the defender that's in front of you. And what are the 3 areas, that a triple threat position in the basketball stance you can do? You can shoot, dribble, or pass. But there's a 4th one that not a lot of people think about, and that's the pivot foot. And so, like, how can I move around and change the angles and change the perception of the obstacle in front of me and change the environment to make one of those options far more achievable? And so I sat there for, as a quick flight, it's an hour and 40 minutes, and just going crazy on the laptop. And like, next thing I knew, we were landing. I was like, oh my God, like same feeling. That you have this state of flow, especially when you're writing and you're working on like an outline or a project like that. Oh, it just goes by so fast. And that's one of the things that I love about the storybook write-ups, the flights that I send out every week, is it forces me into that flow state. I have to write, I have built the discipline and consistency, and I have to write for myself, for the readers, for the discipline and everything that I'm working on. And it gives me that opportunity to not only be creative, but to get into flow and just release the creative outlet that I need. So that way I can focus on being the best version of myself in all other areas of my life and not being distracted. That allows me to focus on doing good, solid work in all the other areas when I have that creative outlet and get into that flow. And so I know exactly what you're talking about. And it's a lot of fun the evidence when you're done, you're like, man, that was awesome. Where was I? You just like, almost like you just rebirthed out of like the abyss of creativity or whatever it is you're working on.
What just happened? And that's the thing, like what started me down this path was like the Flow Research Collective puts it as, how do we turn our work into skiing? When you're going down a mountain, skiing is one of the best examples of flow state, especially if you're, I guess it works both ways. If you're a novice or advanced, there's not a lot of time to focus on anything other else but hitting your line and staying connected to the hill and just making your way down. And when they said that, it was like so evident. When you are at work, you're working on your craft. You are being paid for a role to be on a mission, or you've started a business. How can you turn work into skiing? How can you remove all the other variables to get you in that slot and keep going down the mountain and enjoy it? Because that feeling is extremely motivating. It requires a lot of recovery because of the amount of energy it takes to be in that focused state. But once you get past that resistance point and you're locked in, there's nothing like it, to what you said.
Yeah, I love skiing. The only problem with skiing is it's so quick. Like you don't get like you're flying down the mountain so fast, but you have the AirPods in, you got the tunes going, and you're just flowing. And then like after, we're old now, so I don't know about you, but after a few runs, my thighs are burning. And I'm like, oh my God,
Jello.
I need a break.
Just jello legs.
There was a story in the Gap in the Gain that I wanted to share real quick. I don't know if you remember, but it was a story about Trevor Lawrence, the football player who was drafted number 1 by the Jacksonville Jaguars. He went to Clemson, and I think it was Ben Hardy who also went to Clemson. He's one that shared the story. But it was this idea of you're not attached to the things, to the work you do. And so he kind of came forward when he was during the draft and said, I don't need football. And it goes back to that need versus want. He's like, I want to play football, but I don't need it. And it actually ruffled a lot of feathers in the NFL. And a lot of coaches and GMs were like, well, I'm not going to draft a guy who doesn't like go all in and think he needs this in his life. And, he doesn't care about the drive to win and all this stuff. And so he had to go on and clarify his statements. Like, look, it's not that I don't love football. This is what I want to do. This is my absolute joy and love and everything I want, but I don't need it in my life to define who I am. It's not the work that I do doesn't define who I am. If there was no sport, if this game wasn't around, I would be fine. Like I would be able to accomplish whatever it is I want to accomplish. And I love that perspective. And he says, a line he says, have an intense commitment to succeed and a healthy detachment to what you're doing.
That's so Zen Buddhism, baby.
It's great. And it's like you have a sole focus, or you have many focuses on the things that you do, but it doesn't define who you are. You don't need those things. You want to do them for various reasons. Maybe it's to earn a living. Maybe it's to support the community that supports you, or maybe it's to whatever it is, but you don't need them. You want to do them, and you are your own being. Share your story, focus on the things that make you happy, and do the things that you want to do, not necessarily need to do. And so kind of that change in that perspective of like, I'm going to be happy because I'm doing the things that I'm doing. I'm not focused on, it allows him to say, if I don't win a Super Bowl, there's something to say about that. Like you're not going to be upset, or you are going to be upset about it or whatever. But I just think it was a neat perspective. And he did ruffle some feathers because people are like, wait, what? You're supposed to be like the number 1 draft pick and you don't need football?
Trevor Lawrence must have been reading some Zen Buddhism, because that's the whole concept. And it also goes back to Stoicism, which there are a ton of overlaps in between, is controlling what's in your circle. And we forget, because it's scary, how little control we have over being on this spinning rock in the middle of infinite space. Like, that's getting out there in a little woo-woo, but we're so driven because we have such a small time on this planet to make a dent in this universe that we forget that how much is outside of our control, just the timing of day-to-day life, the opportunities, to use your language, that pass our way. Are we going to be at the right place at the right time? Who knows? But all we can do is be prepared enough and have the self-mastery and self-control to be prepared when those opportunities arrive. If we get too attached to what we think is going to happen, we're setting ourselves up for misery, because we have to be able to roll with the punches and not be attached, because quite honestly, that's what's beautiful about it. It wouldn't be fun if we knew how the storybook rolled out and how the hero's journey ended. I love that, man. I did not recall that one from Trevor Lawrence, so I'll have to go and reread that.
Well, I think that's the pod, dude. That was a good episode.
Great
Enjoyed chatting
episode,
about that
my
one.
brother.
All right, we'll catch you next time. Like, subscribe, follow, join us on YouTube. Phil's got a different background this time. It's nothing too exciting, but it's different. So if you're used to watching this on YouTube, I'm gonna update my background one of these days and just keep you all on your toes. So subscribe and like, follow, share. We enjoy you. Let us know what you think. Let us know what you want to hear. We'll keep coming back to you on a weekly basis.
Go 10X and stay in the game.